The glass door of Renner's Tavern was half fogged with condensation, and through it I could see her laugh. That specific laugh, head tilted back, the one she used to save for me. My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old. I build bridges and inspect the bones of buildings other people trust with their lives. And I had walked into that bar on a Tuesday night for a beer with a coworker, not for what I found instead. My wife's hand was on a man's forearm, not resting there by accident. Her fingers were curled around his wrist the way you hold on to something you're afraid will slip away. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I stood in the doorway with the cold air still clinging to my coat and watched Claire, my wife of 14 years, mother of my 2 children, a woman who told me an hour ago she was grabbing dinner with Sarah, lean toward a stranger like he was the only steady thing in the room. Something tightened low in my chest, a physical thing, like a fist closing around a rib. I reached down without deciding to and touched the wedding band on my finger. 14 years, and my thumb still knew exactly where the little scratch was, the one from the summer we redid the deck. I twisted the ring off and closed my hand around it until the metal bit into my palm. I want to back up. Not far. Just far enough that you understand who I was before that Tuesday, because the man standing in that doorway wasn't born there. He'd been building himself, brick by brick, for a long time, mostly without noticing. Claire and I met in a night class on estate law, of all places, back when I was finishing my engineering degree and she was fresh out of design school. She had this habit of doodling floor plans in the margins of her notebook, little rooms that didn't exist yet, and I remember thinking that if you could fall for the way someone draws a staircase, I had fallen. We married 2 years later in her parents' backyard in Cedar Falls, under a maple tree that's since died and been cut down, though the stump is still there if you know where to look. We built a life the way people do, carefully, then carelessly, then carefully again when the carelessness cost us something. Emma came first, 11 years ago now, all elbows and opinions even as a baby. Jack came 3 years after her, quieter, a watcher. Claire gave up the design firm she'd been junior partner at to freelance from home, so she could be there for pickup and drop-off, for the school plays, for the years when somebody has to be the one who's always around. I told her I'd make up for it. I told her that a lot. Actually, I'll make it up to you. And for a long time I believed I meant it as a promise and not as a way of postponing something I didn't want to look at directly. The truth, if I'm honest with you the way I wasn't honest with myself for most of this, is that I disappeared into my work the way some men disappear into a bottle. It felt productive. It felt responsible. Structural firms don't wait for you to be emotionally available. Deadlines don't care that your wife asked you 3 separate times last spring if you were even still in there. I'd nod. I'd say something reassuring, and I'd go back to a blueprint. I was good at making a marriage look fine from the outside. I was less good, I understand now, at doing the harder, messier work of actually being present inside it. Claire never accused me of anything directly. That wasn't her way. She'd go quiet in a particular register, a stillness that I now recognize as its own kind of language, and I'd feel the temperature in the house drop 2 degrees and choose, every single time, not to ask why. Asking meant an answer I might not want. Not asking meant I could keep believing we were fine, because nothing had been said out loud to contradict it. So there I was, in the doorway of Renner's, 41 years old, watching my wife's laugh land on a stranger the way it used to land on me. And some part of me, some small, ugly, honest part, thought, I did this. Somewhere along the way, I handed her a kind of silence, and she found somewhere else to be loud. That thought didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it made it worse, because there was no clean villain to point at yet. Just a man I recognized. Dark hair, leather jacket, the easy posture of someone who has never once had to apologize for taking up space. Leaning in to say something that made her laugh again. I didn't walk over. I want you to understand that, because everything that came after depended on that one decision. I turned around, walked back out into the parking lot, and sat in my truck for 11 minutes with the ring still clenched in my fist. The metal pressed so hard into my palm that it left a red crescent I'd notice again hours later, in the bathroom mirror, and not be able to explain to myself why it was still there. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself it was strategy, that I needed to be sure, that jumping to conclusions in a dim bar wasn't fair to either of us. That was true, as far as it went. But underneath the strategy was something simpler and less flattering. I was afraid. afraid of what asking the question out loud would make real. What I didn't know yet, sitting in that parking lot with my hands finally steady on the wheel, was that the man in the leather jacket wasn't the beginning of the story. He was somewhere in the middle of it. And the thing that would actually break me open wasn't going to be a stranger's hand on my wife's wrist. It was going to be something much closer to home, something I'd been walking past for months without letting myself see it. I drove home. I put my ring back on in the driveway, in the dark, before I went inside. Claire's car wasn't there yet. I sat down at the kitchen table, in the quiet house our children were sleeping in, and waited for my wife to come home from her dinner with Sarah, not knowing that Sarah, when I finally asked her about it 3 days later, was going to lie to my face without even blinking. Claire came home at 10:47. I know the exact time because I was watching the microwave clock, the green digits the only light in the kitchen besides the one over the stove. She came in through the garage door, keys jingling, already talking before she'd fully crossed the threshold. Something about Sarah's new landscaping, how the woman down the street was having her driveway redone, ordinary chatter, the kind that fills a house, without saying anything at all. She didn't smell like a restaurant. That's the detail that lodged itself in me and wouldn't leave. No garlic, no grilled meat, none of the particular staleness of a place with a bar in the back. She smelled like her own perfume, applied fresh, and underneath it, faintly, like leather, the kind that comes off a jacket, not a purse. I didn't say anything. I asked how dinner was. She said, "Good," and reached into the fridge for a glass of water, and I watched her hand hover a half-second too long over the door before she picked a glass, like she was deciding which version of herself she wanted to be standing in this kitchen. I smiled, even though inside I wanted to ask her 100 questions. It was easier to let the moment pass than to be the man who'd seen what he'd seen. That's the sentence I'd write on a chalkboard now. If I were teaching a class on how to lose 14 years without noticing. It's easier. It's always easier, right up until it isn't. The next few weeks moved the way weeks do in a house with 2 kids and 2 full calendars. Emma's soccer, Jack's reading log, my firm's bid on the new pedestrian bridge downtown, Claire's growing list of design clients now that she'd finally started taking on projects outside the house again. I want to be fair to that period, because from a distance it looked like a good stretch. Claire seemed lighter. She'd started going to a Pilates class on Tuesday evenings, something new, something that put color back in her face in a way I hadn't seen in years. I told myself I was glad. I told myself that a lot of things that spring. But there were textures underneath the good stretch, small and easy to miss if you weren't the kind of person who inspects things for a living. I am that kind of person, professionally. I can look at a beam and tell you, from a hairline crack, whether the whole structure is compromised. I just hadn't learned yet how to apply that instinct to my own house. The first sign was the phone. Claire had always left it face up on the counter, screen toward the room, the way you do when you've got nothing in your life you're managing around. Sometime in March, it started living face down. She never announced the change. It just happened, the way a habit shifts without a ceremony. And I noticed it the way you notice a picture frame hung a half-inch off center. Not enough to comment on, enough to feel. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever sat across the dinner table from someone you've loved for over a decade and felt a stranger settle into the chair instead, you already know the particular kind of quiet that comes with that. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, patiently, waiting for you to either name it or let it keep growing. I let it keep growing. The second sign came from Emma, of all people, which is its own kind of subplot I need to tell you about, because it matters later. Emma had been struggling that semester. Not academically, but socially, in the particular way 11-year-old girls struggle, with a friend group that had splintered into factions overnight the way they do at that age. She'd started having stomachaches before school, real ones, the kind the pediatrician couldn't find a cause for. Claire had taken point on it, ferrying Emma to a child therapist twice a month, something I'd agreed to, and then, true to form, mostly let Claire handle alone while I told myself I was the stability at home. One evening Emma came down from her room and said, offhand, while pouring cereal at 9 at night, because she couldn't sleep, "Mom's been texting a lot in the car. She thinks I don't see, but I do." I asked her what she meant. Emma just shrugged, the particular shrug of a kid who has said more than she meant to and wants to take it back. "I don't know." She just smiles at her phone weird. Then she took her cereal upstairs and that was that. A door opened a crack and closed again before I could see what was behind it. I told myself it was probably a friend. Sarah, maybe, or one of the other design world women Claire had reconnected with once she started taking outside clients again. I didn't ask Claire about it directly. I filed it away the way I'd been filing everything away that year, in a drawer in my head labeled later. The third sign was money, and this is where the second thread of the story actually starts, because it isn't only about a man in a leather jacket. In April, I was doing our taxes. I do them every year. It's one of the few domestic tasks I've held on to, partly out of habit and partly, I think now, because it gives me a reason to look closely at something without it seeming like suspicion, and I found a withdrawal from our joint savings account. $600, cash, in February. Claire had always been meticulous about money, more than me. Actually, she kept a spreadsheet of every home project down to the dollar. A $600 unexplained cash withdrawal wasn't like her. It was like someone else wearing her habits. When I asked her about it, casually, over coffee, the way you ask about something you've decided in advance not to make a big deal of, she said it was for Emma's therapist, a copay issue with insurance that hadn't gone through yet. It was a good answer. It was specific, plausible, delivered without hesitation. I believed it completely, and I want to be honest with you about that, because believing her wasn't stupidity. It was 14 years of a working theory about who she was, and that theory didn't include hiding money. Looking back now, that's the moment I should have asked the second question. Not what was it for, but why didn't you just tell me at the time? I didn't ask it. I was satisfied with a plausible story, because a plausible story let me go back to the drawer marked later and close it again. May brought the Pilates instructor's name into a conversation for the first time. Marcus, Claire mentioned, was really good, way better than the last guy. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? Instructors have names. It would be another 6 weeks before I'd learned that Marcus didn't teach the Tuesday evening class at all, and never had. That detail seemed insignificant at the time. It wasn't. But I didn't know that yet. Standing in my own kitchen in May, watching my wife stretch her calf against the counter before she left for a class I'd never once thought to ask a single real question about. Not the studio's name, not how she was getting there, not who else was in it. I just watched her go, and turned back to the dishes, telling myself that a good marriage was built on trust, and not letting myself finish the sentence that was actually forming underneath that thought. That trust and inattention had started, somewhere along the way, to look exactly the same from the inside. By June, Marcus had a last name, Voss, and a business card, which I found not because I was looking for it, but because it had fallen out of Claire's gym bag and slid halfway under the passenger seat of her car. I only saw it because I was hunting for Jack's missing cleat before a Saturday game. Marcus Voss, certified personal trainer, it said, with a studio address I didn't recognize, not the Pilates place on Grand Avenue that Claire had been driving to twice a week for 3 months. I sat in the driver's seat with Jack's cleat in one hand and that card in the other, and something tightened in my chest again, the same fist from the bar, except this time it didn't let go right away. I didn't confront her. I told myself I needed more than a business card, that a card in a gym bag proved nothing except that she'd once taken a class from a guy who apparently didn't run the studio she said he ran. I put it back exactly where I found it, tucked under the same strap, and drove Jack to his game with my hands too tight on the wheel the whole way there. That weekend, I did something I'm not proud of, and I want to say that plainly instead of dressing it up. I looked at our phone bill. Not her phone. The bill, the itemized one that comes to my email because I'm the one who set up the account 9 years ago and never bothered to change it. I found a number that appeared 11 times in May. 11 times. Always between 4 and 6 in the evening. Always on days she said she had Pilates. I didn't ask you to know what happened next before I tell you. I'll just tell you it happens fast when you finally start looking. I called the number once, from my own cell, and hung up before it connected. I sat with my thumb over the green button for almost a full minute first. That's the kind of thing I never would have admitted to myself a year earlier. That there was a version of me capable of sitting in a parked car, working up the nerve to call a stranger's number to hear if a man's voice answered. I didn't make the call. I told myself I wasn't ready. The truth was closer to. I still wanted, more than I wanted the truth, to be wrong. I want to pause on something else that was happening in parallel, because it matters. Emma's stomachaches had gotten worse, not better, despite the therapy sessions Claire had been ferrying her to. One night I sat with Emma while she cried about a girl named Priya who'd apparently turned the whole friend group against her over something that had started as a joke and calcified into something crueler. Emma asked me, out of nowhere, in the exhausted honesty kids sometimes fall into right before sleep, "Do you and Mom still like each other?" I told her of course we did. It came out smoother than I expected, which unsettled me more than the question itself. I'd gotten good, I realized, at reassuring people about things I hadn't actually examined myself. Claire, meanwhile, had started coming home from her Tuesday classes with her hair freshly washed. Small thing. Almost nothing. But Pilates doesn't usually end with a shower at the studio, and I'd never once seen her walk in with damp hair on any of the earlier weeks. I noticed. I filed it. I said nothing, because saying something meant admitting how closely I'd started watching, and admitting that felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross. She told me, much later, what was happening on her end during those weeks, long after I'd have any right to hear it, and long after it would have changed anything. This is what she was living through, in her own words, before I knew a single piece of it. I told myself it was harmless. That's the lie I built the whole thing on. I'd sit in my car outside the studio, the real one, the Pilates one, for 10 minutes before driving to meet him, telling myself I could still turn around, that nothing had actually happened yet that couldn't be undone. Every time, I drove to meet him anyway. I remember thinking, the third or fourth time, that I hadn't felt looked at like that in years. Not since before Emma was born, maybe not even then. I hated how much I wanted it. I hated more how easy it was to want it. I kept telling myself, one more time, and then I'll stop. I never stopped at one more time. Not once. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. The turning point came on a Thursday in late June, and it came from Sarah, the same Sarah who Claire had claimed to be having dinner with the night I saw her at Renner's. I ran into Sarah at the grocery store, and in the particular way people do when they're not thinking carefully, I mentioned that dinner, thanked her for keeping Claire company that Tuesday back in the spring. Sarah's face did something complicated. A half second of blankness, then a recovery so fast I almost missed it. "Oh, yeah, of course," she said, and reached for a bag of oranges she didn't need, and changed the subject to her son's baseball schedule so smoothly that if I hadn't already been carrying 3 months of suspicion in my chest, I might have let it go. I didn't let it go. That half second was the loudest thing I'd heard in months. I called Sarah that night, after the kids were in bed, and asked her directly, "No dinner that Tuesday?" Long silence on the line. Then, "Daniel, I think you need to talk to Claire. That's not my conversation to have." She wouldn't say more than that, no matter how I pushed, and I understood, in the space of that refusal, that Sarah had known something for a long time and had chosen, out of some loyalty I couldn't name, to protect Claire's silence instead of my right to the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Claire in the dark, listening to her breathing settle into sleep, and ran the last 4 months through my head like a slideshow. The leather jacket man at the bar, the phone flipped face down, the $600, the business card under the seat, the 11 calls in May, the damp hair on Tuesdays, Emma's offhand comment about her mother smiling at her phone weird, Sarah's half second of blankness in the produce aisle. None of it, on its own, would have convicted anyone of anything. All of it together formed a shape I could no longer pretend not to see. I got out of bed around 2 in the morning and went down to the garage, to Claire's car, and this time I wasn't looking for a lost cleat. I found the gym bag exactly where it had been in April. The business card was gone. In its place, tucked into the same interior pocket, was a receipt, a hotel, 40 minutes outside Cedar Falls, dated the previous Tuesday, checkout time 6:52 p.m., which would have given her exactly enough time to shower, dry her hair, and be home by 7:40, right on schedule, right on time, exactly the way she always was. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my own garage, holding a piece of paper that weighed almost nothing and felt like the heaviest thing I'd ever held. I didn't wake her up. I didn't confront her that night, either. I folded the receipt, put it in my jacket pocket, and went back inside to lie beside a woman I now knew, with a certainty that had nowhere left to hide from. I did not fully know at all, and I had no idea yet that the hotel receipt in my pocket wasn't going to be the piece of evidence that finally forced everything into the open. That was going to come from somewhere else entirely, somewhere much closer to home, in a way none of us saw coming. I didn't confront Claire with the receipt, not because I lacked the nerve, By that point, the nerve wasn't the problem, but because some old, stubborn part of me still wanted the story to have a door back out of it. If I gathered enough, laid it all out at once, maybe there'd be an explanation so complete it would swallow all of it whole. I know how that sounds now. I'm telling you anyway, because pretending I was purely rational through any of this would be its own kind of lie. So I became something I didn't recognize in myself. Careful, patient, a little bit cold. I started keeping a folder, an actual manila folder, tucked behind old tax documents in my desk drawer at the firm, where Claire would never think to look. Into it went the hotel receipt, a printout of the phone bill with the 11 May calls circled in red, a photo I took of the business card the next time it reappeared in her bag, this time photographed rather than left alone, because I no longer trusted myself to remember details I might need later. The subplot with Emma kept running underneath all of this, and I want to tell you about it properly now, because it's about to matter more than I could have guessed. Emma's therapist, a calm, sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Whitfield, had asked Claire and me to come in together for a family session, something Claire had been putting off for weeks with excuses about her freelance workload. When we finally went, in early July, Dr. Whitfield said something that lodged itself in me like a splinter, that Emma's stomachaches had a pattern, spiking specifically on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The 2 days, I now understood, that lined up almost exactly with Claire's Pilates and a second, newer excuse, client site visits, that had crept into the calendar sometime in May without me tracking when it started. Kids know more than we give them credit for. Not facts, necessarily. Weather. Emma couldn't have told you what her mother was doing on those evenings, but her body had apparently been keeping a more honest calendar than either of her parents. I didn't ask you to feel sorry for me here. I'm telling you this because it's the first time the two threads of this story, Claire's affair and Emma's unraveling, touched each other directly instead of running in parallel. Up until that session, I'd been treating them as separate problems in the same house. Dr. Whitfield's observation made it impossible to keep pretending that. I called her office again a week later, alone, to ask a question I hadn't wanted to ask in front of Claire. Dr. Whitfield, careful with her boundaries, told me only that she couldn't discuss specifics I hadn't already witnessed, but she did say one thing that stuck. Emma mentioned once that she doesn't like when Mom comes home smelling like the outside. She let that sentence sit there and didn't explain it further. She didn't have to. Meanwhile, the $600 from February resurfaced in a way I hadn't expected. Going back through old statements, because once you start pulling one thread, you can't stop. I found 2 more withdrawals I'd missed the first time, smaller ones, in April and June, both timed within a day or two of dates that also appeared on the hotel's rewards program confirmation emails Claire had apparently forgotten were still forwarding a copy to our shared family email account, the one we'd set up years ago for joint bill notifications and never bothered to close. She'd shifted almost everything else onto her personal account. She hadn't shifted that one. It was a small crack in an otherwise careful structure, the kind of thing that doesn't announce itself as a mistake until much later. I didn't think about it again for almost 2 weeks. I should have. There was a version of this story where I confronted her the moment I found that email trail, and I want to be honest that I considered it. I sat with the printed confirmation in my hand one night after she'd gone to bed, and I nearly went upstairs right then. What stopped me wasn't strategy. It was fear, a very specific, very ordinary fear that once I said the words out loud, there would be no version of us left to salvage, even if some part of me still, stupidly, wanted one. Instead, I did something almost as reckless in its own way. I decided to see him for myself. Not to confront him, just to know. I found Marcus Voss's actual gym, the real one, 40 minutes from Cedar Falls, near the hotel on the receipt, and on a Tuesday evening in mid-July, I sat in my truck across the street and watched my wife's car pull into the lot at 5:40, exactly the way it always had, exactly on schedule. I watched her go inside. I watched a man matching the description Emma had unknowingly given me. Tall, dark hair, the kind of easy posture that doesn't apologize for taking up space. Meet her at the door, not with a trainer's professional nod, but with his hand resting for a beat too long at the small of her back before they disappeared inside together. I didn't follow them in. I sat there for 40 minutes with the folder from my desk drawer photographed onto my phone now too, a digital copy, in case anything happened to the paper one, and I understood, with a strange and total calm, that I had everything I needed. What I didn't have yet was a plan for how I wanted this to end. The accident, because that's what it was, an accident, not a plan of mine at all, came 3 days later, and it came from the last place I expected, Jack's school. Jack had a minor incident at day camp. Nothing serious, a scraped knee that needed a few stitches, and the camp called the emergency contact list in order. I was in a client meeting and didn't pick up. Claire's cell went to voicemail twice. The camp, following protocol, moved to the third number on the list, Sarah, listed as a backup years earlier when the kids were younger and we'd forgotten to update it. Sarah couldn't get there fast enough either, and in a small panic, texted Claire directly. Jack's hurt. They can't reach you. Where are you? I'm telling Daniel if you don't answer in 5 minutes. Claire didn't see the text for almost 20 minutes. When she finally did, and finally called the camp back, Jack was already patched up, sitting with a counselor, more embarrassed than hurt. But the timeline was set now, sitting untouched in 3 different phones, mine, Sarah's, and the camp's official log, which I'd end up seeing later, entirely by accident, when I called to file a formal complaint about the delay in reaching a parent. That complaint call is the reason everything came apart. The camp director, apologetic and thorough, read me back the timestamps to show they'd followed protocol correctly. The 2 unanswered calls to Claire's cell, both placed at 4:52 and 4:58 p.m. And in the middle of that explanation, almost as an aside, she mentioned that Claire's phone had shown as connected on a call attempt logged through the camp's automated system at 5:14, a call that hadn't been to Claire's cell at all. It had auto-dialed the secondary contact number Claire had, at some point months earlier, listed in the camp portal under Additional Emergency Contact, a number I didn't recognize when the director read it aloud, but one I recognized instantly the second I compared it, with hands that had gone strangely steady, against the 11 calls circled in red in my desk drawer folder. Claire had listed Marcus Voss as our son's emergency contact. I didn't say anything to the camp director beyond a thank you I barely remember giving. I hung up the phone in my office, closed the door, and sat there for a long time without moving, holding a truth so absurd in its smallness, a name on a school form, that it somehow finished what 4 months of receipts and phone bills and hotel confirmations hadn't quite managed to do. It wasn't the affair itself that broke something open in me in that moment. It was the realization that Claire had, at some point, without telling me, folded this man so far into our family's actual infrastructure that his number sat 1 line below mine on a form meant to protect our children in an emergency. I drove home that afternoon with the folder from my desk on the passenger seat, the account number confirmed, the man's face from outside the gym still clear in my memory, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful after months of fog, that I wasn't going to wait for one more piece of proof. I had enough. What I didn't yet know, walking through my own front door that evening, hearing Claire's voice call out a greeting from the kitchen like nothing in the world had changed, was that the conversation waiting for both of us wasn't going to unfold the way either of us expected. Claire was at the stove when I walked in, stirring something that smelled like garlic and butter, and for one strange, suspended second, I almost let the ordinariness of it swallow everything I was carrying. Then I set the folder on the kitchen island, next to the cutting board, and the sound of it landing, a soft, final thump, made her turn around. "What's that?" she asked, wooden spoon still in her hand. "Sit down," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. Not loud, not shaking, just flat, the way concrete is flat before anyone's walked on it. She sat. I didn't. I opened the folder and laid the first thing on the counter between us, the hotel receipt, smoothed out from months of being folded and unfolded in my jacket pocket. June 14th. A Tuesday. Checkout, 6:52. I didn't ask a question yet. I just let it sit there. Claire's face did something complicated. A flicker, gone almost as fast as it appeared. "That's not Daniel. That's from a work thing. A site visit. I told you, the Hendricks renovation. There's no Hendricks renovation 40 minutes outside town." I set down the phone bill next, the 11 calls circled in red. May. Every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 to 6. Pilates doesn't call you 11 times. That's a wrong number. I told you Marcus reached out about scheduling. Marcus. I said the name flat, watching it land. I set down the photo of the business card. The trainer at the studio on Grand doesn't have this address. This address is a gym 40 minutes from here. The same gym I watched you walk into on July 15th. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out for a second. Then, you followed me? I sat outside for 40 minutes. I kept my voice level, though something underneath it was pulling tight, like a cable taking on more weight than it was rated for. I watched him touch your back like he'd done it 100 times before. I watched you go inside together. It's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it looks like. My hand came down on the counter, not a slam, just weight, just enough to make the folder shift. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like $600 in cash withdrawals I can't account for. It looks like a man's number one line under mine on our son's emergency contact form. That last one did something none of the others had. Claire went white, then said, too quickly, I forgot to update that. It's old. It's probably from a class roster. Jack needed stitches, Claire. Sarah couldn't reach you. The camp system auto-dialed the secondary number you listed, and it rang through to a man I've never met while our son was bleeding at day camp. I heard my own voice crack slightly on bleeding, the first crack in the comm I'd been holding since I walked through the door, and I hated that it happened there, on the one detail that had nothing directly to do with the affair and everything to do with what it had cost without her even meaning it to. Explain that to me. Just that one thing. She started crying then, but it wasn't the kind that breaks a person open. It was tighter than that, more defensive. It didn't mean anything. It was months ago when I put that number in. I wasn't even thinking. I must have just copied it from an old form. You didn't copy anything. You typed his name in. I placed my palm flat on the folder. Here's what I know. Here's what doesn't add up. I'm done asking you to fill in the gaps for me. Explain it. For a moment, she just stared at the receipt like it was a language she'd forgotten how to read. Then, quietly, differently. It wasn't serious. It's been going on since at least February. It didn't mean anything. Daniel, it was just something that happened. It wasn't about you. It's on our son's paperwork. My voice had gone colder now, colder than I meant it to. Each word set down like another item on the counter. It's not nothing if it's on our son's paperwork. She flinched at that, actually flinched, and something in her seemed to give out all at once, the way a support beam doesn't bend gradually. It holds, and then it's simply gone. Okay, she said, and her voice had changed, dropped out of the defensive register entirely. Okay, you want to know? I'll tell you. All of it. I didn't say anything. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, finally, because some instinct told me this needed to be heard sitting, not standing over her like a prosecutor. I want to tell you what she said next in her own words, because it's hers to tell, not mine to soften or summarize. She finally spoke. This is what she told me. It started in January, I think, though I didn't notice it starting until it already had. I'd taken Emma to that first session with Dr. Whitfield, and I sat in the parking lot afterward and just cried, for no reason I could point to. And I remember thinking, I am 40 years old, and I don't know who I am outside of being somebody's mother and somebody's wife, and I haven't known for years. I signed up for the Pilates class 2 weeks later on a whim, and Marcus wasn't even the instructor at first. He just worked the front desk sometimes. And he said something small, I don't even remember what, some throwaway comment about my form, and I felt seen. That's the only word I have for it. Seen, in a way I hadn't felt in I don't know how long. I told myself that was harmless. Everybody wants to feel seen. That was the lie I built the whole thing on. The first time we got coffee after class, I told myself it was just coffee. I told myself I could stop anytime I wanted, that I was still in control of it, that noticing him didn't mean anything was actually going to happen. I remember exactly what I told myself the first time he kissed me in his car in that parking lot. I told myself, this is the last time. I'll go home, and I'll fix things with Daniel instead. I'll actually try. I didn't go home and try. I went home, and I felt more alive than I had in years, and I hated how much I wanted to feel that way again, and I hated more how easy it turned out to be to keep chasing it. After that, it wasn't really decisions anymore. It was just momentum. Every time I told myself I'd stop, and every time there was a reason not to yet, a bad week, a fight we'd had, a moment you were too buried in work to even look up from your phone. I used every one of those moments as permission. I know that's not fair. I know I'm the one who kept driving there. I want to be honest that I was scared the whole time. Underneath it, scared of being caught, obviously, but more than that, scared of who I was becoming, someone who could sit at this table with my own children and hold something this size without it showing on my face. There were nights I couldn't look at the drawings on the fridge. Emma's, Jack's. I'd stand at the sink and just not look at them. That's how I knew, somewhere in me, exactly what I was doing, even while I kept telling myself it didn't mean anything. She stopped there, breathing hard, and I realized I hadn't said a single word through any of it. I let her finish, the way I should have let her finish so many other things years ago, before any of this started. Is it still going on? I said. Not a question, not really. A statement dressed as one. She looked at me, and something in her face, not defiance, not quite shame either, something in between, answered before her mouth did. I don't know how to stop, she said. I stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor, and I heard myself say the only thing I had left in me at that moment, quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse than shouting would have. You're going to have to figure that out somewhere that isn't this house. I walked out of the kitchen. I didn't slam the door. I went upstairs, into the bathroom, and locked it, and sat down on the edge of the tub with my hands pressed flat against my knees to keep them from shaking, and I understood, sitting there, that whatever came next, whatever shape the rest of this took, I had already, in that one sentence downstairs, said the thing that couldn't be walked back. What I didn't know yet was that Claire wasn't going to fight to walk it back at all. She was going to do something else entirely, something that would take 3 more days to fully reveal itself, and it was going to reframe everything I thought I understood about how this was going to end. She didn't sleep in our room that night. I heard her in the hallway around midnight, and then the soft click of the guest room door, and I lay in the dark on my side of a bed that suddenly felt twice its actual size, staring at the ceiling, waiting for an anger that never fully arrived. What arrived instead was something quieter and stranger, a kind of grief that had apparently been waiting its turn for months, patient enough to let the shock and the evidence gathering go first. I told the kids nothing that week, beyond the plain fact that Mom and Dad needed some time to talk some things through. Emma studied my face for a long moment when I said it, the way she'd been studying both of us for months without either of us noticing, and said only, "Okay," in a voice that told me she already understood more than either of us had given her credit for. Jack, stitches healed, mostly wanted to know if this meant he'd get to skip camp for the rest of the summer. Kids protect themselves in whatever ways are available to them. I understood that better than I had a month earlier. Claire moved into her sister's place 3 days later. Not dramatically. She packed 2 suitcases while I took the kids to a matinee, specifically so she wouldn't have to do it under anyone's eyes, an arrangement we settled on together, quietly, over the kitchen table the morning after the guest room. It was the strangest kind of civility, the two of us dismantling something together with the same care we might have used to build it. The full account, the part I'd been owed since that first confession and hadn't fully gotten, came 10 days later, in a long phone call while she sat in her sister's guest bedroom and I sat on our back porch, both of us finally too tired to perform anything for each other. "I need to tell you the rest of it properly," she said. "Not the version I gave you standing in the kitchen with you already furious. The actual truth." She told me it had ended, finally, the week after our confrontation. Not because she'd found some late reserve of willpower, but because Marcus had stopped answering her calls the moment he understood the marriage was actually collapsing and not just a source of stolen Tuesday evenings. He wanted the excitement of it, she said, flatly, without much self-pity left in her voice by that point. He didn't want the wreckage. The second it stopped being fun, he was gone. I think some part of me always knew that's what he was, and I let myself not look at it, the same way I let myself not look at a lot of things. She told me about the loneliness that had been sitting under all of it for years. Not as an excuse, she was careful to say, more than once, "This doesn't excuse anything I did," but as the honest shape of what had been happening inside her while I was buried in blueprints and bid proposals. "I lost myself somewhere around the time Jack was born," she said. "I don't mean that as a complaint about the kids. I mean I stopped being anyone outside of being needed by people. And when Marcus made me feel interesting again, I think I would have done almost anything to keep feeling that, because I'd forgotten what it felt like not to." I told her, honestly, that I understood the loneliness even if I couldn't forgive what she'd done with it. I told her about the drawer in my head marked later, about how many real conversations I'd postponed into it over the years rather than have them. Neither of us pretended the other person's failure canceled out our own. That felt, strangely, like the first fully honest conversation we'd had in years. held over the phone, after everything, when there was nothing left to protect. The divorce process moved faster than either of us expected once we stopped fighting about who deserved what and started just dividing things fairly. Claire kept her freelance business and moved into a small house on the other side of Cedar Falls, close enough that the kids' school schedule barely changed. I kept the house we'd built our life in, which felt less like a victory and more like keeping the frame standing after the walls had come down. Word got around, the way it does in a town like Cedar Falls. Claire lost 2 clients that fall. Nothing dramatic, no scene, just quiet cancellations from women who'd been friendly with her for years and now found reasons to work with someone else. She never told me this directly. Sarah did, months later, with something like sadness in her voice rather than satisfaction. Claire didn't lose everything. She kept most of her business, rebuilt slowly. But something in how the town saw her had shifted, permanently, in a way she couldn't undo just by being sorry. Emma's stomachache stopped within a month of Claire moving out. Not overnight, but steadily, the way a wound closes once the thing causing the infection is finally gone. Dr. Whitfield told us, in a joint session that fall, that kids often carry what parents won't say out loud, and that naming things, even painful things, tends to be less damaging to them long-term than living inside an unspoken tension they can feel but not explain. I think about that a lot now. I think about the years I spent believing that keeping quiet was the same thing as keeping the peace. Claire came back to the house on a Sunday afternoon in November, for months after she'd moved out, sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd first laid out the folder, and asked, carefully, whether there was any chance at all, of trying again. She'd been in her own therapy that whole time. She looked steadier than she had in years, genuinely, not performing it. I believe she meant the question completely. I sat with it for a long moment before I answered. I thought about the drawer marked later, about how much of our marriage I'd let live inside it. I thought about the hotel receipt, about Jack's name on that camp form sitting one line above a stranger's, about 11 phone calls in May. I thought about how much I'd wanted, in that parking lot outside Renner's back in the spring, for there to still be a door back into what we'd had. I don't think so, I told her. Not cruelly, just honestly. I don't think I can unknow what I know now, no matter how much either of us has changed since. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer and had needed to ask anyway, and we sat together a little longer in a silence that wasn't hostile, just final, the particular kind of quiet that settles once 2 people have finally stopped negotiating with each other's pain. I want to stop here for a second and tell you something I didn't expect. I braced myself for years of feeling gutted by this. Instead, sometime around the following spring, I noticed the weight was simply gone. I hadn't announced it to anyone. I just woke up one morning and realized I'd slept through the night, and then realized I couldn't remember the last time that hadn't been true. I started coaching Jack's baseball team that spring, something I'd always told myself I didn't have time for. I started actually asking Emma about the specific girls in her friend group by name. Instead of letting Claire carry the whole emotional inventory of our children by herself the way I always had. I recognized myself again, somewhere along the way, in a version of myself I hadn't seen since before either of my kids were born. Someone who showed up instead of performing the appearance of showing up. Claire and I are civil now, genuinely, in the specific way that only comes after you've both stopped needing anything from each other except the shared job of raising 2 kids well. She's engaged again, I hear, to someone steadier than Marcus ever was. I hope that's true for her. I mean that. That's my story. A folded receipt in a jacket pocket, a name on a school form one line too close to my own, a ring I took off in a bar parking lot and put back on before I ever walked through my own front door. If any part of this sounds like your life, I hope you take it as a sign to stop waiting for later. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. Tell me in the comments if any of this hit close to home. I read every one, and I'd genuinely love to hear your own story too. See you in the next one. I did something that afternoon in the doorway of Renner's that I'm still not sure I fully understand. I stood there, and I watched, and instead of walking over, I just held onto that ring until it hurt. Something shifted inside me in that moment that I couldn't name yet, but I felt it immediately. The way you feel weather changing before the sky actually does anything about it. I told myself I needed proof before I could ask the question. Looking back now, that was already the moment I should have asked it. Not because I owed her the benefit of the doubt, but because I owed myself the truth faster than I gave it to myself. I didn't ask about the phone turning face down. I didn't ask about the $600 the first time it surfaced. I smiled, even though inside I wanted 100 questions answered, because it was easier to believe a plausible story than to sit with an uncomfortable one. That became a pattern I didn't notice was a pattern until it was almost the whole shape of that year. A marriage held together less by trust than by two people's mutual, unspoken agreement not to look too closely. The camp calling Sarah instead of reaching either of us. That was the accident neither of us saw coming. The one piece of this that wasn't buried in a drawer or a gym bag, just sitting in plain sight on a form neither of us had looked at in years. It took my son getting hurt to force open what 4 months of quiet surveillance hadn't. I understood, sitting in my office after that call, that I hadn't been building a marriage those last few years. I'd been maintaining the appearance of one, and telling myself that was the same thing. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after a confrontation like the one in that kitchen. Not relief, not yet, just a strange, suspended stillness, like the moment after a structure finally settles into a new position it's going to hold for a long time. I sat in that stillness for months before I understood what it actually was. Not the end of something, but the very slow beginning of something else.